Rain fell hard against the mirrored windows of Weston Dynamics, streaking the night with silver veins. Inside the 42nd floor, Emily Carter stood frozen in front of the glass wall of the conference room, watching her name disappear from the company's official announcement screen. Vice President of Operations, Daniel Reed. Her chest tightened. That was supposed to be her title. She had worked for it, bled for it, for 7 years. The applause echoed hollowly in the background as Daniel, her once close friend and colleague, shook hands with the CEO, grinning smugly. He caught her eye through the glass, offering a smile that wasn't gratitude. It was triumph. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. No hard feelings, Em. Just business. Her heart cracked in two. For months, she had trained Daniel, shared her ideas, her plans, her reports, and he'd stolen all of it. Now, he stood where she was supposed to stand, basking in the light that should have been hers. She walked out of the room quietly. The elevator doors closed, sealing her in a box of cold reflection. Her trembling hand touched the mirrored wall. Her own reflection looked back, eyes red with humiliation. When she reached the parking lot, thunder rumbled overhead. She sat in her car, tears mixing with the rain outside, until anger slowly began to rise from beneath the heartbreak. The betrayal burned like acid. That night, she didn't sleep. She scrolled through old emails, messages, late-night chats with Daniel, every memory turning sharper, uglier. Then she found it, an old message where he'd mentioned a private company drive, a backup no one else knew about. Something inside her shifted. If Daniel wanted to play dirty, she'd show him what that really meant. The next morning, Emily arrived early, before dawn. The office was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. She logged in using a code she remembered from one of their old joint projects. To her surprise, it still worked. Inside that hidden drive, she found everything: financial frauds, falsified reports, bribery chains, and evidence linking Daniel directly to illegal transactions. Her pulse quickened. Her hands trembled over the keyboard. This was bigger than she thought. Daniel hadn't just stolen her promotion. He'd built his success on lies and crimes. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind her. She froze, screen still open. Slowly turning, she saw Daniel standing at the doorway, coffee in hand, eyes narrowing. "Well," he said coldly, "looks like someone's working overtime." Her heart pounded in her chest. She quickly minimized the screen, forcing a smile. "Just finishing some pending reports." He walked closer, setting his coffee cup on her desk. "You should let it go, Em. It's over. I won fair and square." She clenched her fists beneath the desk. "If you call stealing fair." Daniel's smile turned sharp. "Careful. Accusations like that can ruin a career." He turned and walked away, leaving the faint smell of his cologne behind, and a warning heavy in the air. Emily exhaled slowly, her anger now cold, focused, and sharp as a blade. He had power, he had connections, but she had the truth, and she would use it. By the time the sun rose, her plan had already begun to take shape. She wasn't just going to expose Daniel, she was going to destroy everything he built, piece by piece.
The first rule I taught myself that week was simple. Don't burn the bridge you might need to cross. Rage wants speed. Strategy wants time. I forced my hands to steady and turned the discovery into a blueprint. I didn't tell anyone about the hidden drive. I didn't call Monica, the labor attorney who'd once helped me with a punchy non-disclosure clause. Nobody, not yet. Instead, I did the opposite of drama. I cataloged. I copied. I made 3 encrypted backups, one on a thumb drive, one on a cloud I controlled, and one printed and locked in my tiny apartment safe. The evidence had to survive more than my temper. It had to survive his lawyers. Step 2 was verification. Digital trails can be messy and ambiguous. Metadata is the arbiter. I called Jordan from IT, not as an alarmed subordinate, but as a colleague with a small favor owed. Years ago, I had covered his late shifts when he was finishing grad school. He owed me, and he wasn't the type to gossip. He met me for coffee at 7, bleary-eyed and protective. I slid the thumb drive across. "Run a clean forensic snapshot," I said quietly. No logs that shuffle timestamps, just raw readouts. If this is what I think it is, I don't want any questions about chain of custody. Jordan's face went still as he skimmed the files. He didn't speak for a long time. If this holds, we're not talking about office politics anymore, he said finally. We didn't publish. We didn't tweet. We archived. Jordan made a copy and stored the hash signature so that any claim of tampering would show up on the record. Next, I identified the collateral damage other lives Daniel's schemes had grazed. The hidden drive wasn't just a map of inflated numbers. It showed vendors paid late, contracts rearranged, and a pattern of favors that tilted procurement toward a single consulting firm that fed Daniel's offshore accounts. That firm had people. A junior account manager named Rosa, who'd been quietly emailing me months earlier asking about a delayed invoice. I called Rosa. She answered in a weary whisper from a cafe between meetings. When I told her who I was, she sighed like someone finally heard the part of the story that mattered. She said, "They keep telling us it's processing. We can't pay our staff without that." I've been afraid to push back. Fear is its own kind of currency. I promised her anonymity and asked for copies of invoices, bank notices, anything that proved patterns. She sent them in an encrypted email 2 hours later. The patterns stitched themselves into a story, payments routed in ways that favored Daniel's shell partners, deliverables signed off before they'd been executed. Rose's fear felt righteous in my hands. With Jordan and Rose's materials in my folder, I made a quiet call to Priya in compliance. Priya was methodical, a person who loved the hum of processes and whose career had been built on not being dramatic. I framed the conversation as curiosity, professional tidbit seeking. "Can you verify whether procurement followed policy on the Baxter file?" Her reply was the kind you savor when you're playing chess. "I'll take a look. If anything unusual, I'll flag it to audit." Audit was the lever. Once compliance flags something, the machinery starts to whir. Daniel couldn't intimidate an audit as easily as he could intimidate a subordinate. He lacked the paperwork to hide behind. At night, my place smelled of old takeout and printer ink. I made lists, vendor names, dates, names on signatures, phone numbers. I mapped meetings Daniel couldn't explain. I found email threads where Daniel urged mid-sized vendors to switch payment terms at the last minute, and internal notes where he characterized delays as client cash flow strategies. Language was a revelation, euphemisms that masked theft. Then, I did what betrayed me to my own vanity. I baited him, not with a trap that would incriminate me, but with small professional moves that would show how he reacted. I sent an innocuous meeting request to a partner I knew Daniel disliked, copied to the exec's inbox, so it would show up on calendars. Daniel's reply, short, clipped, defensive, appeared in my feed within the hour. His tone tightened. He made the mistake of forwarding it, CCing a subordinate who had access to a compliance folder. That folder, now flagged, got Priya's attention. Small errors are how empires crack. I also quietly reached out to Caleb, the investigative reporter I'd met at a nonprofit panel months earlier. He was cautious. Good, you don't want headlines before facts. I told him I had documentation of procurement irregularities and vendor intimidation at a Fortune mid-size firm. He asked questions that made my evidence seem sharper in my own hands. He said, names, dates, receipts. He didn't promise prints across the front page. He promised to keep listening. By the end of week 2, I had a professional dossier, forensic snapshots from Jordan, vendor invoices from Rosa and 2 others, an elegaic chain of emails showing Daniel's fingerprints, and Priya's quiet confirmation that audit had opened a preliminary inquiry. I felt the old poisonous calm settle, the moment when you realize the first domino is set. Still, there was one more move to make before anyone saw a page. Daniel was not merely a thief. He was dangerous because he knew how to weaponize sympathy. He'd built relationships where people owed him small favors, and he'd use them to smooth over ugly things. If I presented the evidence without preempting his counterspin, he'd accuse me of bitter revenge and make enough noise to drown the facts. So, I prepared the narrative. I scripted my statements, collected my receipts, and met with Monica. This time, in earnest. Monica read the packet in one long, satisfied breath and said, "We litigate if they hide. We negotiate if they correct. You control the tempo." Her calm was a gift. That night, I placed the final backup in the safe and slid the printed, bound dossier into an envelope addressed to the chair of the audit committee. I didn't deliver it myself. I hired a courier service that allowed anonymous drop-offs. It felt theatrical, like the old spy novels I devoured in college, but it was also practical. The chair couldn't accuse me of staging if the packet arrived on official letterhead and in an evidence seal. As rain began again, I sat on my balcony and let the city breathe. This was no longer about reclaiming a title. It was about unmaking a pattern, about giving vendors their money back, about protecting the junior analyst whose idea Daniel had sold, about making sure no one else learned the lesson of keeping their head down. My phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed. My heart startled. I let it go to voicemail. A message played. Priya's measured voice. "We've received an anonymous dossier. Audit is convening Monday. Keep this between us for now." The word "we" settled like cold metal in my stomach. We were no longer alone. The machinery had engaged. I smiled, a small, private thing, and whispered into the night, "Okay then, let's see how deep the roots go." The next morning, the elevator door opened, and Daniel's reflection stared back at me like a promise I intended to collect.
Rain poured over the cracked sidewalks of Brooklyn Heights, turning the neon reflections into rivers of color. Auntie Rosie stood at her apartment window, watching the city bleed red under streetlights. She wasn't the same woman who baked cookies for neighbors or waved at the mailman. That Rosie was gone. What stood now was a storm waiting to strike. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Unknown number. You're digging too deep. Stop. Or next time it won't just be a fire." Rosie stared at it, her jaw tightening. The audacity. She typed back calmly, "Next time, bring a shovel. I'll dig your grave myself." She deleted the message and picked up her coat. She was going hunting. Her first stop was Tony Slick Russo, one of Leon's old contacts. He ran a shabby car wash front for something darker. Rosie entered, the air thick with diesel and deceit. "Tony," she said softly, stepping closer, her eyes cold. "You owe Leon. I want names." He laughed nervously. "Lady, you got no idea who you messing with." Rosie's hand shot out. She slammed his head against a car hood. "I buried a husband and a son. You think I care who I'm messing with?" Blood dripped from his nose. His voice trembled. "Marcus Vale, the boss. He runs everything now. He ordered the hit. You fire, you loss." Her heart pounded. That name, Marcus Vale, was familiar. The same real estate tycoon who'd appeared on TV talking about revitalizing communities. The same man who tried to buy our building before the explosion. Rosie whispered, "He killed my family for land." He nodded weakly. "And he'll kill again if you don't." A gunshot cracked. Tony fell silent, a hole in his forehead. A red laser dot glowed briefly on Rosie's chest. She dove behind the car as another bullet shattered the window. The shooter was on the roof. She grabbed Tony's gun, rolled to the door, and fired 2 rounds upward. Silence. Then footsteps running. Rosie burst outside, her raincoat flaring behind her. She saw a shadow leap between rooftops. "You can run, but I'll find you." Back home, she opened Leon's laptop, salvaged from the wreck, the only thing not burned beyond repair. When she turned it on, the password screen flashed. She entered Family First. It unlocked. Inside were blueprints, financial records, and an encrypted folder marked Vale Project. She clicked it open. Documents revealed permits signed before the explosion. It wasn't an accident. It was demolition. Her home had been cleared for profit. Tears filled her eyes, but not from grief, from rage. "You destroyed my life for money." Then she noticed something, security camera footage labeled Warehouse Night 07. She pressed play. The screen flickered. Marcus Vale stood there laughing with his men. Torch it. No survivors. Rosie whispered, "Gotcha." She sent the footage to her burner email, made copies, and printed stills. She pinned Vale's photo to her wall next to Leon and Eli's pictures. Lightning flashed. The city rumbled like her heartbeat. "Tomorrow," she said aloud, loading the gun Tony left behind, "the hunter becomes the hunted." She stepped into the rain once more, her silhouette reflected in the puddles, a grieving mother transformed into vengeance itself. Rosie's hands smelled of oil and rain. She'd scrubbed until the skin on her palms was raw and still the grit stayed under her nails, proof the city kept on her like a second skin. She taped the photograph of Marcus Vale to a scrap of plywood and pinned it to the corkboard beside Leon and Eli. Under each face, she'd written a date, a place, a promise. East River Pier was the kind of place people used when they wanted to be invisible. Rusted pilings, a few shuttered boathouses, and the echo of distant freight horns. Rosie chose it for the same reason she'd chosen everything: visibility without spectacle. If you wanted a man like Vale to expose himself, you put him somewhere he thought he owned. She arrived an hour before dusk, dressed in black knit and a thrift store parka. The sky was the color of old metal. She parked 2 blocks away, took the long way in, and kept low. In the hollow of her coat, she carried the printed stills from the warehouse footage, a small voice recorder, and the little pistol Tony had left, cleaned and loaded. She did not romanticize the gun. It was a tool like any other. She planted a borrowed phone, one that pinged to a burner, inside a battered crate. It would broadcast audio to a private cloud if certain decibel thresholds were met. The idea was simple. Bait a confession, record it, give it to someone who could not be ignored. At 7:30, the pier smelled of salt and old tar. A pickup truck rolled up, headlights slicing the falling light. 2 men jumped out, stocky, plainclothes types, who looked as if they belonged to contractors rather than crime families. Rosie felt the bile rise and swallowed it. She stayed in the shadows. A third figure stepped from behind them, tall, broad-shouldered, leather overcoat, face more chiseled by taxes and tabloid photos than by sun. Marcus Vale moved like a man for whom people made room. He scanned the pier with the practiced stillness of a predator scenting the wind, and then he spotted the crate with the planted phone. "You set a meeting and left a crate?" he barked at the men. "Idiots!" One of the men smiled, a thin, humorless curl of lip. "Boss asked us to make a little demonstration. You know, show the contractors who holds the dock. Show Leon's people what happens when you get in the way." Rosie's pulse thudded. She slipped closer, keeping to the shadow of a pilaster. She could see him now, Vale's face less a mask than a map of safe and practiced cruelty. He bent, fingers brushing the crate, and began to speak. "Listen," he said, voice oily and confident. "This city bends when you know how to nudge the right people. Give me the permits, give me the crews, and I'll build something you can be proud of. You think I want bodies? No, bodies are messy, but sometimes collateral, necessary inconvenience. It happens. When you don't play, well, you learn." Rosie's breath was a held thing. The phone inside the crate recorded every word. He laughed and explained in detail the permits, the demolition list, the cutouts for offshore accounts. He named individuals. He named a lawyer who'd signed permits the week before the explosion. He named the soft underbelly of the city's development scene. County clerks who could be persuaded, consultants who took payments in the guise of fees. You keep my name out of it, and I make your life profitable. You get what you need. You don't, you get ashes. He didn't see the woman in black slip from shadow. He never saw her until she stood 3 feet away, and he turned startled sharp, like a man who'd caught cold. "Marcus," she said, voice flat with everything she'd stowed away for 3 years. "You killed my family." For a fraction of time, the world faltered. Vale's arrogance hit a snag. "Who?" He blinked. "Lady, you don't, this isn't—" "It's on tape." She held a photograph up. His eyes flicked to Leon's stills on her backboard, an accusation in paper. "It's in the warehouse footage. Torch it. No survivors. You told them." He stepped forward, and the men moved like trained seals skimming for a cue. "You're a crazy woman," Vale said, voice trying on contempt. "You have no idea." The younger man reached for Rosie's arm. "We should—" The hand closed not on her wrist, but on the younger man's throat. Rosie had moved before any voice told her to. She had trained in a different life. Punches learned at kitchen tables, rolls learned when she'd hid Eli under mattresses. She shoved him back. He stumbled into the edge of a piling and cursed. The older man pulled a metal baton, but before he could pivot, a single authoritative shout tore across the pier.
"Police! Hands where I can see them!" Blue lights ignited at the pier entrance. For a suspended second, Vale's smile slipped into something that looked like calculation and panic. Rosie took advantage. She walked up to Vale until the smell of his aftershave mingled with salt and diesel. Calm was the tightest muscle in her body. "You're going to tell them everything," she said simply, "or I'll hand this to the detective who's been waiting." The detective, young, breathless and legal, cut through the scene. He'd been watching the pier after an anonymous tip. He moved like someone who has been owed a break in a long case. Vale was taken aback, then furious. "This is extortion." He whirled on the men. "Tell them the woman was stalking us. Tell them the file is forged." The detective kept his eyes on the phone and the crate and the footage manifest on a thumb drive. "We'll need to record a statement." He spoke into his radio. "Forensic team out. Take the men in for questioning." When the men got belligerent, the detective cuffed them. One of them, thin-lipped, tried to bargain. "You don't understand who this man is." The detective didn't flinch. "Then tell him when he meets the DA." Vale's posture changed. For the first time, he looked small. His practice empire couldn't keep him warm. He looked at Rosie then, and there was a flash of something like recognition, like someone who realized the true cost of his ledger. "I've been making arrangements. People like you get messes made quick. You don't live through these things." Rosie set the photograph down on a wet piling. "Did you think a mother would look for answers?" she asked. "You never thought anyone cared enough to follow the money." They took the men to the cruiser. The detective, to whom Rosie handed the primary thumb drive, watched her face when he scanned the footage. His jaw worked. "This is solid," he said. "We'll run the IT chain of custody. If this is what it looks like, you might have broken something open." Vale's last act before being led away was a cold appraisal. "You'll be sorry," he said, the threat old and worn. Rosie answered without flinching. "I already am. I lost everything. This isn't about me anymore. It's about stopping you." She watched the truck drive off. The city exhaled, like a living thing. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know what you did." She smiled despite herself. The game was far from the over, but tonight she had a tape, arrested henchmen, and a detective who breathed in the right parts of evidence. She had leverage. She had momentum. She pinned another date under Leon's photograph. Tonight's date, East River Pier. Then looked at Eli's framed smile and whispered, "Hold on, Mommy's getting loud." The rain tapered to a hush. The river shone black and indifferent. Rosie felt the ache of exhaustion and a brittle satisfaction. One more step, one more truth. The city would not let them hide forever.
The trial began 8 months later, but the war for justice never stopped. Rosie spent every day balancing between exhaustion and defiance. Her name had leaked to the media. The widow who took down the empire. Reporters waited outside her apartment, hungry for a quote, for tears. But Rosie didn't speak to anyone. Her words were saved for the courtroom. Marcus Vale had pleaded not guilty. His lawyers called the recordings manipulated, claimed the footage deep-faked, and even suggested that Rosie was mentally unstable, a woman driven mad by grief. Every time they said grief, Rosie gripped the edge of her seat and reminded herself not to stand up and scream, because grief wasn't madness. Grief was fuel. The day of her testimony, the courthouse smelled of old wood and coffee. Rosie wore a navy blue blouse, clean lines, no jewelry, the way her husband, Leon, always said she looked strongest. The prosecutor nodded to her gently before the first question. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "why did you record Mr. Vale that night?" Rosie's voice was steady, because no one else would, because the men who were supposed to protect us were too scared or too bought to act, because my husband and son died for a building that should never have collapsed. The courtroom went still. "Do you believe Mr. Vale ordered that demolition?" "I don't believe," she said. "I know." He said it himself, and now everyone knows too. When the defense cross-examined, Vale's lawyer smiled the way rich men smile when they think poverty makes you weak. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you claim you acted alone, without police authority, without a warrant. That's illegal. Do you understand that?" Rosie leaned toward the microphone. "Yes," she said. "I understand laws. I also understand that my family's deaths weren't accidents. So if you want to charge me for wanting justice, go ahead." Someone in the back of the room clapped once. The judge glared, but the sound had already rippled through the crowd like thunder. 2 weeks later, the verdict came down. Guilty. Marcus Vale was sentenced to life imprisonment for conspiracy, corporate homicide, and obstruction of justice. His 2 men turned state witness, confirming every detail of Rosie's recordings. The city roared with headlines. "Corporate king falls. Widow brings down construction giant.
Justice at last. But Rosie didn't celebrate. She stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the gray skyline and whispered, "Leon, Eli, we did it." Months passed. The snow came early that year, dusting the city like a fresh page. Rosie moved to a smaller apartment overlooking the park. She volunteered at a legal aid center, helping women trapped in systems they couldn't fight alone. When people recognized her, they didn't call her a victim anymore. They called her the woman who made the system listen. Sometimes, late at night, she'd replay the recording, not for vengeance, but for closure. The crackle of the pier, the sound of the rain, her own calm voice saying, "You killed my family." And she'd realize it wasn't rage anymore that drove her. It was the promise she'd made to her son that the truth would speak even when no one believed. One evening, she visited the memorial near the old riverfront, a garden built where the warehouse once stood. Small plaques bore the victims' names. Rosie laid 2 white lilies, her fingers trembling in the cold wind. She had 8th. She said, "You can't rest now." A soft voice broke the silence behind her. "You're Rosie Miller, aren't you?" She turned. It was Detective Alvarez, the young cop from the pier, now wearing the lieutenant's badge. He smiled, eyes tired but kind. "You changed more than one life that night," he said. "Vale's conviction reopened 3 old cases, and we got new laws passed for construction safety. That was you." Rosie exhaled slowly. "It was all of us," she said. "Anyone who decided not to stay quiet." He nodded. "You should come by the department sometime. We're naming a community outreach program after your son, Eli's promise." Tears welled up before she could stop them. She bit her lip and whispered, "Thank you." That night, Rosie returned home, sat by her window, and watched the city lights flicker across the river. The skyline looked different now, not softer, but somehow fairer. She poured herself a cup of tea, turned on the radio, and smiled when she heard the announcer say, "Justice doesn't always come easy, but sometimes one woman can change an entire city." She closed her eyes. The city hummed beneath her, alive, unbroken. For the first time in years, Rosie slept peacefully.